Everyone, or morning in my case.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, um, I haven't been in for a while, just been busy with other things, but I haven't forgotten about you, honestly. Um,
Oh, we know.
yeah, what I've got planned for tonight, I'll just show you this first. This is something I made quite a few years ago. I'm going to move over to one of my other cameras. The lighting's probably better, so I'm just going to move over here. Right, I'll just hold it there. It's a hollow form I made out of master birch a few years ago now, but what I've done here is coloured it
Nice.
with spirit dyes and used multiple colours that I've sort of applied and cut back to some extent to shade sort of different sections. And it's the figuring in the wood that's made the colouring work the way it has. Um, really, the camera and the light in here isn't really doing this justice. There's a lot more detail in the colour than you can pick up, and you get the chatoyance in the wood that is showing different colours as I move it. So it changes depending on the angles you look at it as well. So one thing I like about master birch, it's an expensive wood, but for things like that, works really well. But I know one or
That's
two people
pretty.
I've sort of seen um, are a bit horrified that I'm putting colours on a wood like this, but I think it just works really well. But what I
Right.
want to do tonight is to show you the sort of the essentials of the colouring process and how I do that. I'm not going to make a hollow form because that would probably take a bit too long, but I'm going to do a bowl or two um, to show you the the colouring process. So I've got a couple of blanks here. This one, I'm not entirely sure what the wood is, but if I hold it so the light's sort of reflecting on it, you can see there's some ripple
Yep.
figuring across the surface of that, and likewise on the other side. It was in amongst the pile of blanks I bought a little while ago, and it's got no label on it, so I'm not entirely sure what it is. Um, Most of it's a light colour, and then there's a darker patch here, so I don't think it's something like sycamore because it wouldn't have that darker wood. But um, anyway, I'm going to start with that one, and then I've got a couple of other blanks. Another one that's it's horse chestnut. That's another one that's quite nice. You get some quite nice figure in it. So we'll hopefully have time to at least do a couple of these and try a couple of different things with the colours. So start with this one. So I've got the blank pre-drilled. I'm going to use a screw chuck, as you can see there. And I've got a spacer on the screw chuck just to shorten the screw because this is a moderately shallow blank. It's not much more than about an inch. So I've sort of half the length of the screw for a small blank like this. And really, on this particular screw chuck, it's about 3/8 diameter, the outside diameter of that screw. And the core, you drill it to 5/16. So it's quite a strong screw with a fairly strong thread. And that length of like half of the screw is, I'd say, half an inch or so length. And that's plenty to hold onto a smallish blank. So I'm going to put that onto the screw. First step. And when you put a piece of wood onto a screw chuck like this, what you're trying to do is to make sure that's screwed on as tight as you can get it so that the top face of the blank is tight against the either the screw the face of the screw chuck itself or in this case the wooden spacer. Um, that way you're transferring all the cutting forces into the screw chuck and into the lathe rather than it all being borne by the screw. Because if you do that and it's a bit loose and the screw's taking all the force, then you'll end up with a bent screw basically. So it's essential that it's done up tight. I've set my rest up a little below center. All I'm going to do initially is clean up this front face. Um, can switch to that one there so you can see both. My other camera's upside down. Give me a second. Reconfigure that one.
Think Al's been over there messing with your cameras.
Yeah, right. Find the right button. Not that one. Right, just bear with me. Trying to read the menu on this camera upside down. What I've done here is I think I can't notice if you remember in my previous demos where I had the camera on the end of the lathe, it was hang on. It was the locking screw on the tailstock was just getting in the way of the shot, so I've moved it and put it just a little higher so it doesn't. But instead of having the camera hanging beneath, it's now hanging above. So that's why. Right, yeah,
There we go.
that should do it. Oh, I forgot about that. I should have. I'll get rid of that. That's it. Right, good. So got the camera the right way around now. Good. So yeah, initially I'm just going to flatten off this front face. I've at the moment the speed on the lathe is set to minimum. So I'll start the lathe off, and my usual procedure here is to get out of the way. If I forget something and that comes off, I don't want to be in the firing line. So I'll stand out of the way, bring the speed up. I mean, it's a smallish blank, so it's probably overkill in this case, but it's just my normal way of working. And if I do it all the time, then I'm not going to forget when it does matter. So I'll take that up to, I don't know, 1200 RPM, something like that. For a smallish blank, that's probably okay. I'm just going to use a spindle gouge and use a pull cut. So I'm using the left wing against the wood just to draw it back across the face. All I'm trying to do is flatten that off as my initial sort of clean up. And really it's only the center that matters at this stage, because I just want to flatten off enough of this so I can sort out a spigot and then mount it on the chuck when I need to. So I've already set a pair of dividers here to the diameter of the chuck jaws I'm going to use. It's 1.5 inch jaws, so I can just eyeball that across the center, left point against the rest, and just adjust the position so the line I scribe is equally spaced across the center. So that's my mark for my screw chuck. And then I just need to remove a bit of wood to expose that spigot. And I'm just using a pull cut, pulling it into the wood, taking bites, sort of heading towards the center. I'm using a fairly shallow set of jaws. I'm using the Axminster O'Donnell jaws, which are just under 5 mm deep. What's that, about 3/16?
Yep.
And I've got a depth gauge here set to the depth of the jaw, so I can use that to gauge whether I'm deep enough or not. So let's go a little bit deeper. That's going to be close enough. So that's just taking off enough wood to expose my sort of the spigot there. Now I just need to shape it. So next step, point the bevel straight down the bed of the lathe. So I've got the bevel parallel to the bed of the lathe. I'll put the tip of the tool on that line I scribed and then just push the tool towards the headstock. So initially I'm just creating a straight spigot, and that's done that. And then I can use my depth gauge just to check that, and that is pretty much exactly the depth of the jaws, albeit just a whisker beneath. So that's 4 and a bit millimeters, or 3/16, I think. So I'm about right there. So that should be okay. The other thing I'll do at this point, whether I need it or not, is to make a center mark. So I'm just going to move the tool rest out of the way, having turned the lane off, as you can see. With a regular blank like this, it's not too big a deal. Just bear with me a sec. I had some students in my workshop today, and one of them was using this lathe, and he's over tightened the clamp, and it just jams when you do that. So got to give it a tap there, and then it'll free up the tailstock. Well, it usually works. Yep, that's better. That's it. It's freed it up. Yeah, I had this one chap working on this lathe, and he was a little bit nervous and wasn't entirely paying attention to everything I said. But I did say to him, said to him more than once. I said, just like finger tight is all you need on that. Like one finger, just do that, and that's it. But I think he got both hands on it and leant on it, so it's a bit over tight. So anyway, that's fine. I've loosened it up now. This blank, there's a little just there, a little bark inclusion on the corner, but as I shape this bowl on the outside, that will disappear. So all should be good. So I'm just going to shape the outside, and again, sticking with the pull cups, using that left wing just to take off some of the outside of this piece of wood. Doing a fairly simple shape. I mean, you can sort of play around with shape to your heart's content, really, but here I'm just going to keep it fairly simple. And I'll cut a little step where the jaws are going to be. So I'm defining a foot at this stage. If I colour all of the outside of this, then I don't want to have to be returning any part of it, obviously, because then I've got to redo the colouring. So I'm shaping everything as I want it now. Let's just see how that looks. So I'll just a shallow sort of reverse curve at the bottom. Yeah, that's not looking too bad figuring wise. There's some ripple going on there. You can see it on the camera. I've not quite got up to the rim yet. I'm not worried about that at this stage. But having done the rough shaping, I can modify the cut slightly now and refine that with a more of a shearing cut. There's two ways of attacking this. One is you drop the handle and put the gouge against the wood and take more of a shear cut, or bring the gouge round the other way and do a push cut. So you're cutting on the tip of the tool, but cutting at a steeper angle. So you get that shear cut effect, but with bevel contact. So either would work. I'll do the shear cut here because that means I don't have to sort of move things around. So I'm just trying to take a light cut with the handle drop down, and a slicing cut is what the essence of the shear cut is. I still do the shear cut with the flute quite open. I know some people turn the flute facing into the wood more like that. And I mean, the reason I don't like doing that is because I want to see where I'm cutting. So I just leave the flute a bit more open. But not to say that either's right or wrong. It's just my way of doing it. I'm just moving my rest in nearer that corner. So at this point, I'll trim that top part. And here I'm using the bevel on the wood. I'm taking a bit of a slicing cut just to shape the top part of the bowl there. I'm just going to stop the lathe and have a look and see that I've cut all of, there's still a little bit of a flat on the edge, so I need to take a little bit more off. It's splintering the edge because I'm pushing the tool off the wood, but I'm going to clean up that face when I do the other side anyway, so I'm not too concerned about that. If it did matter, I could always come in from the other side. So I can cut up to that point there and then come in from the headstock end. So I'm cutting into the wood rather than off it, so I'm not splintering a corner. So if that corner matters, do it this way. I mean, there's this sort of rule about cutting from center to edge on the outside of a bowl because it's cross grain, and that way you're cutting with the grain. But on this top section here, because at that point you're almost 90 degrees to the grain anyway, it doesn't make a huge amount of difference whether you're cutting left to right or right to left, because you're still almost 90 degrees to the grain. So either way, you're getting a reasonably clean cut because you're cutting at 90 degrees to the grain in either direction, and it makes very little difference. So that's cleaned up the corner. You see most of that splintering is gone now because I've cut the other way. Just a little bit of tear here, so I can sort of finish off cleaning the rest of that up with shear scrape. Figured wood is notorious for getting torn grain because you've got grain going in all sorts of different directions. So there's no perfect way to cut it. So I think sometimes with a figured wood, it's a case of seeing which direction of cut gives you the cleanest finish. And sometimes it's a case of doing what works, rather than what the textbooks say you should do. So be prepared to adapt as you go. So that should be there. So that's cleaned it up to the point where I can sand that. Shape-wise, happy with that. It's pretty sort of uniform curve. A good tip on shaping and testing shapes. I've got a super expensive tool for checking the shapes on my curve, and it's this. It's a hot melt glue stick, 12-inch hot melt glue stick, and that's my shape checker. What I do is I put the bottom of the glue stick there against the bowl, and then bend it around the curve, and I'm looking between the glue stick and the wood. And if I can see light at any point, that's showing me that I've got highs and lows. If there's no gaps, then I know I've got a smooth curve. So it's a very quick and easy way to test that curve. A tip I picked up many years ago, and it's certainly done me good in improving the shapes of my bowls. Because you can sort of look at a curve and think, yeah, that looks right, and you run your finger around it and think, yes, it feels right. But that takes it a stage further. You can actually pick up some very small discrepancies in this shape that you probably can't see and you probably can't feel. So it just takes it that little bit further in getting the shape as smooth and as sort of continuous as possible. So yeah, and as Dane says, fuel tubing, all you want is something flexible. You can, if you've got a really thin flexible steel, that will work too, but the tighter that curve is, obviously the more your chosen sort of flexible, whatever it is has got to bend, and the glue sticks are very pliable and work quite well. But yeah, that's what I use. So I'm just going to sand the outside of this, starting off on probably 180 grit. See where we're at. Yeah, I think I can probably go with 180 grit there. I'm just going to fire up the extractor. So I'll move my tool rest away from the point where I was cutting, so I got no risk of getting my finger caught between the piece of wood and the rest. And I'm just going to drop the speed down a little bit as well. At the sanding stage, I don't want to generate too much heat. Some woods are sensitive to heat, and they'll start to check on the surface if you overheat them. So just dropping that speed down a bit, so I'm not going to overheat it and cause myself problems. Where I start with the abrasive, it depends on the wood, how good a cut I've got, and to some extent which way the wind's blowing, because it does vary a bit. But what I'm trying to achieve with whatever I decide is the first grit is to remove all the little bumps and ridges, tool marks, torn grain, anything else I don't want in the final surface. So if that first grit doesn't achieve all of that, there's no point going finer. I've got to go the other way. I've got to go coarser and come at it from the other end, really, and see where it goes. So that's sanded to 180 grit. You can see that figure in the surface. Where the dark section of the wood is just there, there's very little of it left, so that works quite well for what I'm doing. And there's just a little bit there where it's slightly darker, but that should work okay. I'm just going to turn the extractor off now. So I sanded that to 180. depending on how many colours I've got here, I build it up. I'll sand to a certain point, put on the first colour, then sand the next grit, and then put on the next colour, and then sand to the next grit and put on the next colour. So I'm sort of deciding at this point how many colours I'm going to put on and how fine I'm going to sand it. So I sanded to 180. I'll sand one more grit at this stage to 240. Then I'll put the first colour on, and then I'll sand to 320. I might do a bit of 240 first and then 320, but to sand it away a bit quicker. But that's what I think I'll do. And then once I've sanded to 320, I'll put the potentially put the second colour on. So one more at this point. So down to 240 grit. So I should have left my extractor running. If I'm doing more colours, I might sand to 120 and then 180 and then put the first colour on and so on. But here I'll go to 240 and then put the first colour on. What you're trying to do is sand down through the grits and apply colours at each stage, because as you sand the surface of the wood finer, the absorbency of it changes, and that's influenced by the figure as well. So you get selective shading and selective colouring, and that's what makes this technique work. So sanding that surface to 240 grit now. And I think that bit of 240 grit's seen better days, so I'll get rid of it and get a fresh piece for the next time. So that's sanded to 240, and there's some nice figure there. So that's where I want to be. Right, so colours. What I want to do now is to put the first colour on here. I've combined various colours, but what I would generally say is you start with the darkest colour and then work up through the lighter colours, and you can use, obviously the darker colours are going to have a shading effect on what you put on beyond, whereas if you do the lighter colours first and then the darker, it doesn't quite come out the same. To some extent you can experiment with this and improvise, but that's the way I normally do it. And in terms of shading colours, sometimes the first colour will be black, and it's doing exactly that. It's just shading. That's all it's doing, nothing more. I'm just putting some of these nitrile gloves on so I don't end up with spirit all over my hands, because if you've ever used it, you'll know what I mean. It takes a few days to wash it out if you get it on your hands. So I'm going to use a airbrush to apply the colour. I was debating on whether just doing it with a pad, but in the end I thought, no, I'll use an airbrush. That's what I normally do. So I've got my airbrush set up. Here I'm going to use one of these airbrushes. Cheap and cheerful. These cost are probably equivalent to $10. So they're not expensive. It's what they call a single action airbrush. You've got a button there and it's on or off. No more control than that, other than here on the nozzle there's a preset. So I can preset the amount of flow through the nozzle to introduce sort of control how much paint or dye is being applied. I've adapted this with a bayonet fit in here, so I can bayonet fit the airline on from the compressor to quickly change airbrushes, because what I do when I'm working with multiple colours, I have one of these with each colour bottle attached. And these have a bottle mounted underneath. Let me just grab one, I'll show you. So it's like that. So that will just push onto the gun there like that. So we've got what they call siphon feed. So the liquid is held beneath the gun and it's siphoned up through the nozzle here into the airflow. Works well with spirit dyes, and the reason I like these for doing this particular type of work with spirit dyes is I have one bottle with each colour. So all I do is swap bottles, or I just swap the whole thing, swap the whole gun. So I've got a few of these and plenty of these bottles. I've got one bottle with each colour, so I can just set up each gun with a colour. So on this one, I'm going to go for a purple as my first colour. It's a nice dark colour. Sometimes I go for a dark blue, like a royal blue. The colours I'm using are the chestnut spirit stains, by the way. But there are obviously multiple brands out there that you could do this type of work with. So there's my gun set up with the colour. The reason for the gloves is in the top of these caps, there's a little air hole. So as the liquid comes out, the air is sort of replacing it, so you don't end up with an airlock in there, which will stop the flow. So and as I'm using this, I tend to move them around quite vigorously and get a bit carried away, and some of the liquid might well come out of that little hole, and that's how I get it on my finger. So that's why I'm wearing the gloves, just to make sure I don't end up with it all over my fingers. Right, so get my airline set up. I've got a compressor set up to about sort of between 30 and 40 psi is where I normally set it for this. Um, Airline connected, and what I can do before kicking off with that is just do a quick test. So I've got a little bit of kitchen towel here, and I'm just going to switch to the other camera there, so slightly easier to see what I'm doing. So I just got a bit of tissue here. Sometimes I use just an old bit of cardboard as a target board, and all I'm doing is spraying a little bit of colour on there just to see how much flow I'm getting, and if I think I need more or less, I can adjust it. These are fairly cheap and cheerful guns, but if you come in closer, you can take a sort of a thinner line like that, and farther away, I'm getting a thicker line. So you've got a little bit of control there, and you can preset that nozzle. You can actually adjust the nozzle on the fly, but it's a bit of a fiddle to do, and probably not really the way they're designed to work, but you can do that. So I'm dropping the speed down. If you're worried about keeping your lane in pristine condition, then put some plastic sheet or something over your headstock so you don't get too much colour on it. All I'm going to do is aim at the back of the piece of wood, so most of the overspray is going to go past the headstock rather than on it. But I am going to get a little bit of overspray probably. I find that over time, my chucks and screw chucks and various things tend to change colour because I'm doing things like this. But it doesn't matter too much. Every now and again, I'll just rub them clean with a wire brush to get it all off. So I'm giving that quite a good coating. Put plenty on, let it soak in. So I'm sort of almost saturating the surface. That should do it on the purple. Got to give that a minute to dry, so I can still see the figure working through the colour there. Being a dye, this is effectively transparent. So I'm maintaining the character of the wood and the figure coming through there. So I'm just going to give that a minute to dry. I'll just leave that running. When I clean these guns out, what I do is swap the bottle for one that's just got methylated spirits in. I think you call it denatured alcohol, don't you? Over here we call it methylated spirit, but it's basically methanol and water, isn't it? So that's what's in here. It doesn't look clear because I've used it a few times and it very quickly gets contaminated. So that's got a bit of colour in it, but it doesn't matter. It's just effectively it's just a wash to blow the gun through. And with these guns, that's all I need to do. I don't need to strip them down and take the whole thing apart and clean it too fastidiously. I'll just blow this through, dry it off, and it's good to go. Being a dye, there's very little in the way of solids in this, so it doesn't actually have too much of an issue with the gun getting clogged. Different kettle of fish with acrylic paints. I use acrylic paints to airbrush as well with a different type of airbrush. I use a gravity feed airbrush for the acrylic paints and a dual action one. And with those, you've got to clean them a lot better because once the acrylic dries, it's a pain to clean them up and to strip them down and clean it. It's a bit of a faff. So with those, I do clean them sort of much more rigorously than these. A little bit longer to dry on that.
Paul, on the jars, can you keep your dye in the jar and use it as a storage container?
Yeah, I've got just a plastic box that I put them all in. But what I do when I'm storing them, I'll, well, let me just bring this one back. You see this one here? It's just got a solid cap rather than one with the nozzle.
Yep.
So when I'm storing them, I just put the solid caps on, and that stops
There you go.
evaporation. When
Okay.
they're in use, I'll change that for the cap with the nozzle on it.
Right. Slick.
When I
Yes,
bought
sir.
these guns, they had a special offer on. They sell these bottles with the nozzles on, um, and all I do is swap it over. I put that onto the bottle with the color. So that's how I apply it and use it on there. But yeah, they're only on for as long as I'm using the colors. Once I've done and I pack it all away, then I'll just put the solid caps on. So I've
Okay.
no risk of it spilling or um, evaporation. So that stores pretty good. Okay, so that's pretty much dry. So I'll go with that. Um, I'll keep these gloves on. It's probably not the easiest thing to do with the sanding, but I'll keep them on anyway because I'm going to put another colour on in a sec. So I sanded that to 240 grit. Now what I want to do is sand some of that colour away. So I'm going to go back up to turning speed, back there, put the extractor back on, and this time I'm dropping now to 320 grit. So I'll start sanding with the 320 grit. Now we'll see how much of this colour is removed by the 320. If I don't get enough of it off, I might just drop back to 240 initially and then back to 320. You can see this paper's clogging pretty quick. So not too big a deal. I'll use it until it's sort of past its best, and then I'll switch to a fresher piece. So initially it looks a bit sort of rough and ready, a bit streaky. If I turn it off at this stage, you'll probably see it looks a little bit streaky. But already you can see at this point, there's a bit of the lighter wood showing through and a little bit of shading still. And here's a little bit more purple. There's a little bit too much purple on the surface there still. So a little bit more sanding to be done here. And I'm just going to get right in there by the foot. Yeah, I wouldn't normally wear any sort of glove when I'm turning, but I know these will just tear if I actually did get them caught on anything. So that's the only time I would ever wear gloves. So that's a bit better. I think it still needs a little bit more here, but I'm just going to sort of selectively hit the points where I think I need to take a bit more off. Okay, that'll work. So there's some color there. I've taken probably 3/4 or more of that color off, but where it's sitting is in the figure.
Yeah,
So
it rolls
it's sort of
nice.
highlighting the figure. So having done that, I can switch to another color. And as I said earlier, what I want to do is get lighter in color. So I'm going to go for a light blue. What Chestnut call a light blue, I would call it more of a turquoise. I think is my description of it. So again, I'm just putting a cap on the bottle, so I've got the appropriate bit there to attach to the airbrush. This is a second airbrush, so I can have one of these with each color, and if I want to use them again, I've already got them set up. And sometimes when I get sort of playing with the colors and doing this sort of thing, or coloring other pieces, I've got a few airbrushes all lined up, each one with a different coloring. So I'm just switching them over on the gun using these bayonet fittings, so they're quite quick and easy. So that's it, that's ready to go. So same as before, I'm just going to do a quick blast here with my test. That's looking okay, go with that. And on this one, I am just going to apply the two colors. So I'll drop the speed down a bit. and apply some colour here. Now this one you can put as much or as little as you want on, depending on the effect you're after. If I stop there, you can see we've now got a fairly light turquoise with a little bit of shading from the purple, and the purple still sort of showing through. So I think it's giving it quite a nice effect. I'm just going to put a little bit more turquoise on. I could even overspray that with darker colours and have a little bit of more conventional shading, if you want to call it that. I mean, that's a bit more turquoise, so it's darkened it just a little, but you can still see the interaction between the purple and the blue there. So it's picked up the figure and highlighted it.
Yeah, that's looking great.
You see that?
Oh yeah.
So that sanded it to 320, didn't I? So I could go a stage further, sand that to 400, and just lightly take that back, and either put a little bit more of that color on, or even another color. So each time you apply a color, you sand it to the next grit, and so on. So depending on how many colors you want, you just sort of figure out where you want at each stage, and go with that. So I'm just going to lightly sand that with 400. I might just top it up with purple after, top it up with the light blue again after I've done this, because it is going to cut some of that surface back. So it depends on exactly what you want as to how much, and really I need to leave that to dry a bit more. I would normally leave these for quite some time to make sure it's fully dry, but here I'm just trying to rush that slightly so we can do the whole thing while we're here. So I've taken off some of that colour so we can see how it looks. I think that still looks okay as it is, but I might still put a little bit more colour on. But I just want to sand it to the 400 grit as a final stage with this. What I was saying about selective shading in a more conventional way, let me just put a little bit more of this turquoise on. That'll do. What I could do is apply, for example, a darker blue at the top and bottom just to shade it in and almost to frame it. So there's all sorts of things you can do here to play with shading it in different ways. In fact, let's just do it. Why not? So I'm just going to get a third gun, turn my extractor off, and this time I'm going to be much more selective about where I apply the color. Up until now, it's all been full on sort of putting total coverage, total saturation of the surface, if you like. Here, I want to be a little bit more selective. So I just want to grab another one of these bottles with a nozzle. So I've got a third one on my gun here. So that's it. So I've got the third gun set up with a dark blue, a royal blue, I think was what Chestnut call it. The other blue, Chestnut just calls blue, the one I call turquoise. Chestnut calls it just blue. And this one they call royal blue. It's a much darker. I'll show you on here. Fire the blue on that. And that's actually where I want it. It's spraying a lot less. So I've got to work on it a bit longer to get a decent coverage, which is what I want here. I want to be a little bit more selective about the application. So I'm actually winding this nozzle down a bit to reduce the paint flow or the dye flow, as is the case, because I want to build it up slowly. I don't want to put too much on too quick. So I'm not trying to get saturation here, just a little bit of selective shading sort of nearer the edges. That's a bit too much. About there's probably not enough, so somewhere between the two. Yeah, we go about there. That should work. Okay, so all I'm going to do is shade the edges. I don't normally do this, but I'm always up for experimenting. So right on the inner edge, near the foot, I'll start off where the spigot is, because that's all going to get turned away. So I'll start there and just bring the gun out and I'm just concentrating on that bottom corner and building up some of this darker blue near that bottom edge. And I'll do the same on the top corner. Slowly build up some blue on that top edge. I mean, I'm not seeing much of a change, and you're probably seeing even less of a change on the camera because it's not picking up the colours as well as my eyes do, and even I'm not seeing that much of a change at this point. Just stop and have a look. So it's very subtle. Yeah, there's not a lot happening there. So I'm just going to open that nozzle up just a little bit more. That's probably too much. Bit too much still. All right, that'll do. We'll go with that again. So I'll give it another blast near that top edge. So that has changed it. A little bit more flow down, a little bit right down the bottom. So I've just shaded it right on the edges. It's quite subtle, but it is visible. I'm going to put a little bit more on the top edge. So I think it's just a bit too subtle. So a little bit heavier there. So that's sort of shaded the top edge a little bit darker. We'll go with that. Yeah, happy with that. Right, so that's the final application of colour. As I said, I'm sanding that now to 400 grit. So I can stop there. So my next application here is to seal that. I'm going to use a spray on, again, chestnut gloss lacquer. You use whatever brand of lacquer you prefer. This acrylic lacquer works quite well. It could be a cellulose rather than acrylic. I think either will work with these alcohol-based dyes. But I think when you're putting colours on like this, what you want to do is to build up a depth of shine. So you want a surface that gives you a deep shine because that really gives depth to the colour. So I'm just giving this can a good shake. Fortunately, because I've been in my workshop all day, it's quite warm in here. It might be too cold otherwise in here, but I've been in here with 4 days going, 4 people in here and me, and heater going as well for most of the day because it is colder here at this time of year. So my workshop's still quite warm. So I'm just putting like a few light coats on. Give that a minute to dry between each blast, and then applying some more. This is fairly fast drying the acrylic lacquer, and I'm putting enough on so it's giving it a sort of almost a wet look on the surface. Not so much that it's running, but you want to put on enough so it looks wet. And then that'll dry. I'm trying to sort of accelerate this and speed up the process a bit. Normally I'd wait longer between coats, but that's the thing with painting and demos. You've got to try and boost the sort of throughput slightly. So I'll leave it at that at this stage. I might put more on later when that's fully dry. And I, with my sort of gloss finishes like this, to get that color, give that color depth, I'll put on several coats of lacquer. I'll show you another one that this is one I did in a demo recently, and it's the same process I've just done, and it was a little bit rushed, so it's not perfect, but as a demo piece, it's not bad. And you can see there, we've got a similar process. It was shaded with purple with that same light blue on top, and where you got the figuring in the wood, it's sort of highlighting that a bit. And that was done with gloss lacquer as well. I put quite a few coats on that. It still needs sort of a final sort of cut back and probably another coat on top of that, and then burnish to get the full sort of gloss effect. But you can see what I'm saying about that's got a bit of depth to the color now because the gloss lacquer is picking that up. But yeah, it needs a little bit more work to finish it, but it's not far off now. So that was a demo piece a little while ago. But yeah, over here you can see the purple shading, which I think is sort of, it just highlights the figure and works with the character of the wood, and I think it's quite a nice effect. So I mean, Master of Birch takes this sort of to the next level in a way because of the figuring in the wood is so intense. So it works really nicely with that. But the hollow forms I showed, like the one I showed you earlier, I used to make them in batches, do a half a dozen or so at a time. And what I would do is split, once I've turned the outside and at the stage where I'm putting the colour on, I would split them up into twos. I'll do two one colour, two another colour, two another colour, and then let that dry, sand it back, and at the next stage, mix them up. And again, do three colours, two of each, and then if I put a third colour on again, mix them up. And so I'd end up with six that have got different combinations of colour.
Right.
Some I liked and some I didn't, but oddly enough, usually the ones I didn't like were the ones that sold first. So, so it says a lot about my sort of colour sense, I think. But yeah, I mean, it's a quite an interesting thing to experiment with. So that's I'm just going to give that a minute to dry. So now it's probably a good time to ask questions. So if anyone's got
Could
any
you
questions, if you want to fire
could
away.
you Paul, could you use a hair dryer to speed up or a heat gun to speed up the drying?
Yeah, you could. Yeah, that's a good idea. A little bit of heat. Um, Good way to speed that process up. I can take my gloves off now.
There you go.
So
Does anybody
yeah,
else
you're
have
right,
any
Dane. Yeah,
questions?
I've got a paint a hot air paint stripper in my workshop, and as long as I hold that a good distance away, that would work as
Yeah.
well.
I
That
know I
gets
use a hair dryer on some
yeah,
of
hair
my
dryer and
frames. So
that sort of
yeah.
thing would be good if you want to accelerate it. I mean that should be touch dry in a couple of minutes,
Yeah.
so I can leave it for that long. Just get it to the point where it's touch dry, and just be
Right.
careful with it, and then I can.
How durable is that lacquer you're using, that acrylic lacquer?
Oh, what? Sorry.
How durable is it? The
It's quite
acrylic lacquer.
I would say quite a durable finish. It's acrylic based, um, and when it's cured, effectively that's a coat of plastic, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I would
Okay.
say it is fairly durable. Yeah. I mean, most of the acrylic paints are. Um, I mean, if you've got time and want to see more, I've got another piece of wood lined up we can put on and do another one.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's do that.
I won't bother turning the inside of this, but what I sometimes do is I'll do the outside of the piece of wood one colour. I'm just trying to take this off without actually touching the bit that matters. Let me go back to my camera over here. So I'm just taking this one off the screw chuck and doing it without touching the bit I've just lacquered. So I can take that off and let it dry somewhere.
Set it on the
And I'll
spigot.
throw another piece of wood on. Um, but before I put that one away, just have a look at that.
Yeah, that's pretty.
Very
Yeah, the
pretty.
dye just goes so far to
Oh,
coaxing all that character out of that wood.
yeah,
Now,
it looks a bit like ash, but I'm not 100% sure. It is and it isn't. Um,
Paul, can you buff that with wax or not?
yes, you could. Yeah, I mean, once this is fully hardened, I'd leave it 24 hours at least to let that lacquer fully cure. And really, I think this is still looking a little bit. Um, Perhaps orange peel is the wrong word, but I've still not saturated the pores of the wood, so it's still looking a little bit open. So I would probably let that dry, quick sanding back to cut back the surface, and then apply another coat of lacquer and keep going until I've got a nice uniform gloss. And at that point, then think about buffing. But yeah, absolutely, you can buff that once it's fully cured. I wouldn't do it too quick because I found out to my cost once that I tried to rush it and the surface it dragged slightly the lacquer and messed it up. So I had to sand it all off and start again. So that was a bit of an interesting one. But yeah, normally I would sand it back to flat and then burnish it or buff it. Sometimes you use a burnishing compound like a cutting compound that you might use on car paints and things like that. So I've got another piece of wood here, a little bit bigger this time, but also got some nice figure in it. This is
Oh yeah.
horse chestnut,
Oh yeah.
and there's some figure going on in this. It's ordinarily quite a bland wood because it's almost just pure white. But when you've got some nice figuring in it, it is nice stuff to work with. Nice soft wood, easy to turn. I say easy to turn, but where you've got that sort of enhanced figure going on, you've got this problem with grain direction and all that. So it can be quite a difficult wood to turn because of that, because you're getting tear out by the nature of the grain going all over the place. So that can make it a bit of a challenging wood to turn, but worth persevering with, I would say. Right, so I've got that second piece on. I'm going to do the same as before, flatten off that front face, lay speed set to minimum, wind this up to a decent turning speed. This is a big amount. This is about 8 inches, so I'm running at sort of 800, 850, that sort of area. Let's go back to dual view. So again, just flatten off the face. So I'm just using the pull cut to flatten off the surface. You can do this either pull cut or the push cut. If you want to do the push cut, I'm just going to adjust this front camera slightly so you can see the outer edge. And then I just want to get the camera right to the edge there. That's better. Push cut, I'll position the gouge so the bevel's pointing straight across the piece of wood, handle down a bit, flute pointing forwards in the direction I'm going, and just come on the edge like that. Coming on the edge and cut forward. So that's as effective as the pull cut. Depending on the piece of wood, you might find one more effective than the other in terms of how clean it leaves the surface. And I can keep that push cut going all the way to the center and then flatten that off and just check I've actually cut that flat. So I'm looking to see that all the saw marks have gone. They haven't actually. There's still an area which is uncut. But all I'm worried about really is the center section where I want to put the spigot. The rest doesn't matter too much. So I'm not overly concerned that I haven't flattened all of it as long as the bit in the middle is. So I can mark my spigot as before, left point on the rest, the right point just floating in the air, and then adjust till I've got the spacing right about there. Again, about a 4mm depth of spigot, which is about 3/16. I can check that with my depth gauge as well if I want. Go deeper than that. That's more like it. Yeah, we'll go with that. So again, pointing the bevel straight down the direction of the bed. So I've got the bevel parallel to the bed. Just cutting a straight spigot. When I get to the bottom of that cut, if I keep the flute open, what I'll do is leave an actual slight curve right in the corner. And I don't want that because that's going to interfere with the jaws. But when I get almost to the bottom, I rotate the gouge so that I close the flute, so the flute's now vertical. And that way the tip of the tool gets right to the bottom of that cut. And I get a 90-degree corner, sharp corner at the bottom. So that makes sure that my jaws are going to seat right into that corner. Once I've done that straight cut, bring the handle of the gauge left slightly, so I'm steering the bevel inwards, and then I can start the cut just a little bit in from the corner. If you try and pick this up right on the corner and dovetail it all the way to the corner, what usually happens is the gauge kicks one way or another and you mess up the edge. Just start a millimetre or two or a 16th or so to the left of that corner, so you're on that flat face that you've just cut, and the gauge doesn't kick. The fact that you haven't taken the dovetail right to the corner isn't any problem, and it might actually be a benefit, because if you do take the dovetail all the way to the corner, you've got a weak corner. So this gets around that problem, and you've dovetailed it all except the last 16th or so. So there's my dovetail sorted. Now, whether I need it or not, I'll bring my tailstock in here. and just wind that in. Now it's there for support if you want a sort of belt and braces and a bit of extra security. But what I'm primarily doing that for is to mark the center of the spigot. So when I reverse chuck this piece at the final stage to turn the spigot away and flatten the foot and all that, I'll use that center mark to remount this and get it centered correctly. So that's why I'm doing it. But having got it there, if it's not in my way, I can leave it there. It's not costing me, not costing me anything to leave it there. So you can see I didn't center that blank up before cutting. I never do normally. If it's balanced enough to actually turn it at the speed I want, I don't bother, because all I'm going to do is cut that surface away. So what's the point of truing up what's going to become waste wood? So I'll just go straight in with a gouge and shape it. And that's doing it for me. I'm getting rid of that uneven edge as I shape it. So there's no point putting the rest on the outside just for the purposes of turning it around and truing it up. The only time I will do that is if I've got a blank that's so far out of balance, I've got to run it slow, because it's just unstable otherwise. So so there, I might true up the edge just to true up the blank and get it better balanced. I mean, I do work with some large blanks at times and make some big-ish bowls that are like natural edge ones and things like that, and they start off well out of balance, so you've got to try and do what you can until you've got it better balanced and then bring the speed up. So again, I'm going to put a little curve at the bottom to define a foot and take a little bit more of this surface away. I don't know how good a piece of wood this is going to turn out to be. There was evidence of some wormholes in it on the surface. Oh yeah, there's quite a lot in it. So this is not going to be a finished piece, but you can see here we've got like worm tracks going all over the place and holes here and there. So this isn't going to be a finished one. This is going to go in the firewood pile when I finish this, but it'll work for the purposes of the demo. So we'll carry on. So I'm dropping the handle, doing that shearing cut to clean the surface up. I find the shearing cut sort of quite effective on the bottom 2/3. The top edge where it's into the end grain section, I'll probably just bring the gouge round here and do a push cut like that. So I'm on the bevel now doing a push cut, but if I lift the handle of the tool a little higher than I would normally, I'm still getting that slicing action on the tip of the tool. So I'm almost getting the same effect of a shearing cut, but with the added benefit of bevel contact, which should give me a cleaner cut and a cleaner surface. Because a lot of these figured woods, if you've got bevel contact right behind the cutting edge, it actually gives you a cleaner cut. And I'm seeing a clean cut up here compared to what's down farther down. There's a little bit more tear out down here where I was doing the rougher cut. So I need to do a little bit more with a shear cut. Now that gouge, I've used it for a bit. So I'm going to switch to a freshly sharpened one to continue. So when I'm doing these last finishing cuts, I can do it with a freshly sharpened gouge. One issue I find with some of the, here I've got one of the robust rests. It's quite wide. And if you're doing a shearing cut where you want the handle quite low, it's difficult to do with a wide rest because you can't get the, excuse me, it's difficult to do to get the handle low enough because it starts to pivot on the back corner of the rest here instead of the top of the rest where it's supposed to. So what I do to get around that problem is just to raise the rest above center. So it's not the norm where you'd normally be working, but by raising the rest, I can put the tool on the rest at a shallower angle, so I'm keeping well clear of the bottom of the rest here. Like you can see, I've got my finger underneath it, and that's plenty of room there, but I'm at the right angle for doing a shearing cut with the handle raised slightly. So I'm just adapting the circumstances to, or the situation to the circumstances. So I'm getting that shearing cut on the edge. And hopefully clean up enough of this surface. Okay, you see that's loads of wormholes there. I don't know if there's any live occupants, but they've certainly been busy in there at some point. So yeah, I'm not going to have this as a finished piece, but it's fine for doing what we're doing here and a bit of experimenting. Still a little bit of tear there. So what I'm going to try instead of that shear cut is what I was saying earlier about doing a push cut with bevel contact. So I'll bring my rest back down to normal working height, set it up just below center, so I'm cutting sort of on center, and I'm now bringing the gouge over here. Let's switch these cameras around that way. So I've got my gouge over here with the tailstock out of the way. I can now get my gouge where I want it. So I'm coming on the edge of the foot there. Keep the bevel in contact. That just isn't cutting where it's supposed to be there. I'm not sure. I think I've got a dull edge on that gouge actually. Yeah, I'm just going to switch to yet another gouge. It feels sharp, but it's just not cutting the way it's supposed to. Just grab another one. So, gouge number 3. Yeah, that's better. That's cutting. So I got the handle quite high, which means the tip of the tool, where it's cutting, is slicing across the wood. I've got the edge at about an 80-degree angle. I'm just trying to stand back a bit so I'm not blocking the view from the camera. But I'm doing a sort of a slicing cut on the tip of the tool, swinging that gouge left and following the curve round. I'll just stop there and we'll have a look. So that's a much cleaner cut compared to the piece of wood I've left behind. So that's giving me a sandable finish, definitely. So I can continue the cut from there. And keep swinging that handle left as I come around the curve. The top section doesn't really need a lot, so I'm just allowing that cut to feather out. And I'll get that up almost to the top. I think that wants a little bit more off at the top. I'm just looking at the profile and the shape, and now just sort of fixing the shape. So that's a much cleaner finish. And yeah, that's sandable from there. So there's no torn grain there. It's sliced it cleanly, cut it cleanly. So yeah, sometimes you play around with different cuts until you get one that works, which is what I've done here. That cut, because I had bevel contact and a slicing cut on the edge, so almost a shear cut on the edge, but with bevel, that's left a cleaner surface than just the shear cut on its own in a shear scraping fashion. So that's left a better surface. So we'll start off with 180 grit again. And sand this. Oh, got 150 there. Now on this one, I'm just going to sand 180 and then apply colour. So I'm just sanding that enough to sort of smooth out any little bumps and ridges that I might have left off the tool. If this was going to be a finished piece, I'll give it a little bit more, but that's going to work for what we're doing here. Right, so I need yet another pot. This one, I'm just going to take the shading to sort of the down to the basics. I'm going to shade it with black. So there's a bit of figure going on there. It's not as intense as the other piece actually. I can see the figure, but it's a bit more subtle. So the shading might be a bit more subtle too with this one. But I'll do black, and we'll see where we go. So I got my pot of black there. One more gun. I'm just going to steal the gun out of the purple here. Put my gloves on first. I'll usually remember to put the gloves on after I've covered my fingers with one colour or another, and then wear it for a few days until it wears off.
Yeah, I've never done that before.
No, it's durable stuff though, isn't it? You can't just wash it off. After a few days, each time you wash, it gets a little bit more off. But yeah, it does take a few days to get rid of it.
I find I can get quite a bit off of it with a quick wipe with the denatured alcohol. So
Yeah, you can try and use that as a solvent to lift off more of the color. Yeah, definitely.
If I get it on my fingernails or something, it comes off pretty easily with acetone or denatured alcohol. Hey,
Yeah.
Paul, we got a question in chat about what brand of airbrush you're using.
It literally says on it airbrush.
Okay. Yeah,
I'm
and
not entirely sure.
Is it a siphon feed? Is it coming in from the bottom with the?
These are siphon feed. I can probably find a link if you wait till I've finished this. I'll just go and check out the website where I bought them, see if they've still got them, so I can put a link in the chat to where I got them, and hopefully that will give you a bit more info. I'm not entirely sure of the brand, but
that sounds great, Paul.
The absolutely cheapest ones you can probably find. As I said,
I know that
Harbor put a link in the chat there, Matt, for
okay
something that looks very similar, and it is literally the cheapest one you can find.
Yeah, and I know that Harbor Freight sells these too. So, and they work pretty good. So, yep. Okay, thanks, guys.
Okay. But yeah, when I've finished and sat in front of my laptop again, I'll see what I can find. So I'm just gonna do a test spray on the black. This gun was the one I was using on the purple. I've not even washed it out. I'll just put it on the black, and literally the first second it was purple. Now it's coming out black. So that's enough to blow it through. If I'm going from a light color to a darker, I don't worry too much about cross contamination. But I wouldn't now take this gun and put it back into any other colors, because you're going to contaminate them with black, and that is going to affect them. So just be a bit sort of selective about which ones you mix in that sense. And there is a little bit of dye coming out of that hole in the top because I shook it when I shouldn't have done. So I'm just going to wipe that off. Right, so shade this with black. So I'm going to hit it with a black, give it a good coat. That should do it. So while that's drying, I'm just going to clean one of these. Oh, actually, no, I've got a spare gun. I don't need to worry about that. I've got one more airbrush that I haven't used, which I've saved. I'm going to do a second color, which is quite a strong color. So I'm going to do an orange. So I'm going to do black and orange, so sort of tiger stripe fashion. So we'll see how that comes out. Find my pot of orange. I've got a yellow and an orange. Make sure I get the right one. I think it's that one. Yeah, Chestnut do sell an orange, but I actually mix my own. This is a sort of some red and some yellow. So it might not be quite the same as the Chestnut orange, but it works for me. I think I just experimented until I got a shade that I thought looked okay. I've got to sand it back before I use the orange, but I'm just setting the gun up while I'm waiting for that black to dry before I can sand it. So that's ready to go. So we can sand it now. I'm going to go back to, I've sanded to 180 initially, so I'm going to go to 240. Find a 240 here. I had one earlier. Oh yeah, I threw it away, didn't I? Because it's worn out. I've got some more. Oh, there's one. Right, so bring that speed back up a bit. But I'm still running it slower than the speed I was turning out. I'll knock about a third off when I sand. So if I turned it at 1,000, I'll sand it about 700, 750. And again, this is not fully dry, so it's clogging the paper initially, but that's fine. I'll just use it to effectively dry the surface as I go. Flip it over, use the other side. And sometimes when you've done that initial sanding, I'll just stop that and you can see what I mean. There's sort of lines and bands. So I've got to take that back a little bit farther to get rid of those lines. So I can concentrate where the lines are to even out the sanding. It may be there's just a little bit more color applied at that point. It may be just the way it's sanding, the way it's working. So stand a bit more of this back. Now that bit of abrasive I think is also spent, so I'll just get another one. See how we go with this one. I've got a dark line right near the bottom, and that's being a bit persistent. I might just leave that. I could keep going until I got rid of it, but as this is just going to be a test piece for the demo, I'm not overly concerned. But stop and have a look. So it's a little bit more uniform. There's a couple of points where I might need to selectively sand to get rid of the remnants of those lines. There is a line around the rim. What that line around the rim is, possibly I didn't sand it well enough at that point, so the grain was a little bit more open and it's absorbed a little bit more color. So if you don't sand it uniformly, that's what can happen. So it's possibly that, but I'm just trying to cut this back, and at the top here you see there's a line that I also need to sand away if I'm doing this properly. I'm not going to worry too much about that. I'll leave that, but I'll just sand down here a bit. So I'm getting a little bit of shading going on with the figure. I've taken probably 90% of the color off there, but there is a little bit of shading happening with the figure. So that's the black done at 240. So now I can go on to the orange at the next stage and then sand that one at 320 if I sand it at all, or I could just leave it with no further sanding. So if you're using a couple of colors, you've got to almost think backwards. You start off with where you're going to sand to and then work backwards from there. So I'll apply some of the orange there. And that's quite an intense orange. I like that color.
Paul, would it be a benefit to sand in reverse if you're able to? If a person was able to.
Say that again, Dane?
If you could sand in reverse, would it be a benefit to sand in reverse?
Possibly, yeah. Sometimes that pays off. I mean, here, my screw chuck, it's got no locking screw, so I would be a bit cautious about trying to use that in reverse because it might unscrew. But I've got some chucks with the grub screw on the back of the chuck, so I can actually lock that to the spindle and run it backwards. So yeah, sometimes sanding in reverse can be helpful. So that's down here. You can get quite a good impression. I'll see if I can just zoom in there just a little. So around here, we got some nice shading going on. You can see it's picked up the wormholes quite nicely, which is not what you want to do, is it? You don't want to enhance things like that. And here, nearer the top edge, so let me just move the camera up, just a whisker. there. Up here, we're seeing some nice shading effects. That's a successful bit on the shading, but as I said, it's not a nice piece of wood with all the wormholes on that. So this is just going to go on the firewood pile, but it served its purpose to show us the shading. If I was going to finish this, then I could either leave that as it is and lacquer it, or sand it a little bit more and then apply the lacquer after that. So you can go either way with it. If you decide that colour's too wrong, too strong, you can always sand a bit of it back and lighten it that way. So you've got still got scope to experiment with that and change it to what you want. But had that been a nice piece of figured wood, and I'd paid a little bit more attention on the sanding and got rid of some of these rings that are still there that I haven't quite got out, that could have worked quite nicely. But yeah, it's a dodgy bit of wood with some wormholes in it, so it's not going to be a finished piece. But hopefully that's demonstrated the process and the technique. So come back over here. So any questions?
Floor is open, folks. If you have a question, now's your chance to ask Paul on it. I know he was pretty thorough.
Absolutely great.
That
I
was
don't
a
have any questions. I just, hey, thanks a lot, Paul. I mean, that's a lot of inspiration. I'm always thinking about, okay, I could turn the piece, but how could I enhance it?
Yeah. This other piece I did earlier is I'll put it over the lathe again. The cameras, the lighting's better over here, so I'll just bring this over here. I'll show you this one. But yeah, keep talking. Yeah, that's fine. Any other questions, Jen? Yeah.
Yeah, that's gorgeous.
Fire away.
Now, I'm seeing green across the screen. You didn't apply any green at all, did you?
No.
No.
Yeah, it's just the
blue,
color of the wood coming through.
The blue is like a turquoise blue.
Right.
So that's probably the gate green highlights you're seeing.
Well, and then the yellow of the wood comes through that light blue as well.
Yeah.
So we have to take that into account when we're coloring wood. Sometimes we get a little different result from what we initially expected because of that.
Yeah, but you can see there as I'm moving this, the tolerance you're getting with the figure in there and the variation in color. I mean, I don't know how well the camera's picking up.
It's coming through.
The purple's just a little bit subtle. The color wise, you're getting the blue, but I don't know if you're getting the sort of the sense of the purple there as well. But it's certainly
right,
giving it a bit of a shading. So I might actually do a similar thing on the inside. Sometimes I do different colors on the inside and outside. I mean, what I've done in the past was do one like this with purple shading the turquoise on the outside and then dark blue shading the turquoise on the inside, and or even go for totally different colors. I think you've got to try and have two colors that complement each other if you're doing different colors inside and out. So there's got to be some link between the two for that to work. But yeah, that's dry now. It needs more coats of lacquer to give it more depth, because that's not enough really. The first couple of coats tend to soak in, and it acts like a sanding sealer if you haven't put sanding sealer on first. So the first couple of coats are going to soak in anyway. But I'll build that up with further coats, and hopefully I'll have that finished for one of the future meetings, and I'll show you the finished result of it.
Do you leave the base natural, or you finish the base?
The foot I will just leave natural wood, yeah.
Yeah.
When I finished everything else, I'll cut the spigot away and just leave the foot natural wood, because then I can sort of sign it, put my name on, do all that sort of thing, and it's sort of it shows the natural colour of the wood on the foot. The massive birch one I showed you earlier, I did exactly the same with that. I'll show you the bottom on that one. So it's natural wood on the foot. But you can see there, that's the pith. So that's the center of the log. These I always make out of a whole log, because I mean, looking at it on the top there, the pattern on massive birch radiates out from the center. So I'll make these out of a whole log. So I got that pattern radiating out, which I think works quite well with these.
That was a brilliant demo, Paul. Thanks for
Thanks very much.
staying up so late
Yeah.
to do it.
Yes.
Yes, we
Yeah, great demo,
appreciate you
Paul.
staying up late, Paul.
Really,
problem.
it's
Yeah.
going on what? It's 2:30, almost 3 o'clock, almost 2:30.
Yep, 2:20 here. Yeah, just gone.
Yeah.
But
My
yeah,
goodness.
I think I'm gradually becoming nocturnal, so that's fine.
Right.
I've got nothing desperate sort of lined up for tomorrow morning, so I can have a lie-in in the morning. I don't need to get up
There
too
you
early, so
My
He stays
God.
up all, he
I
stays
can
up
make
all
up for
night.
it.
He stays up
Paul. Thank you, Paul.
dogs.
Thank you.
I know I'm gonna have to try this. That looks great.
Right. To do something different. Yes. Thank you.
He stays
Yeah,
up all night
but
watching hedgehogs, right?
But if you don't have airbrushes, you can still do that technique and apply the color either with a sponge or with a brush. I mean, just using a pad you make up out of some kitchen towel or something like that. Any of those are going to work because you're almost taking the surface to a saturation point, so you're putting quite a lot of color on. So apart from the bits where I was just shading the edges and being a little bit more selective, you could apply the color with almost anything. But one thing with the spirit dye is if you're trying to apply it with a brush or a pad or a sponge or something like that, you've got to cover the whole surface really, because otherwise where you stop, you're going to leave an edge. You're going to leave a line of color and then no
Creates a
color. So
witness line.
you've almost got to cover the whole surface so you don't have that edge. Use it sort of with that in mind if you apply it another way other than airbrushing. But yeah, I mean, I've used airbrushes for a lot of years with those spirit dyes, and I find it an effective way to control how much you're putting on. And sometimes I'm blending one color with another and shading sort of one color into another and that sort of thing, and
Right.
use them quite a lot. And it's quite an effective way of applying it. And they're pretty cheap airbrushes, those. So I bought a few of them. So as you can see, I just have one lined up with each color, so you can switch them around.
Well, great demo. My goodness.
Thank you very much. It was a bit of a last minute thing. Dane only sort of asked me to step in a couple of days back, so I thought, what haven't I done yet? So,
Yeah,
I thought,
the
that
regulars
was what I hadn't
schedule
done.
was-
So it was really a demonstration of the technique rather than a finished piece, so to speak. But
Right.
yeah,
No, it was
hopefully it was of interest.
It was
Yeah, it
perfect.
was-
I gained a lot of knowledge out of it. And of course,
That's good.
most know that, I do a lot of dyeing myself, so I love seeing what somebody else does on top of everything that you've done before with dyeing and or the paints. Eventually, I'm going to break out that airbrush unit that you helped me buy 4 years ago, and
Oh yeah,
I'll finally use it one of these times.
yeah, go for it. Yeah,
Right. But most excellent, and I really appreciate you taking on tonight's demo, Paul. I really appreciate it.
that's great. No problem.
Thanks, Paul.
You're welcome.
Sure. All right, folks. Anybody else have any questions for him? Otherwise, I'm going to let Paul go so he can have some tea and go get a couple hours of sleep.
I'll probably stick around for a little while anyway. I'll have another drink before I go. So I'll
there you
stick around
go.
for a bit
Yeah,
anyway.
the only thing I would add is that if you want to get into buy multiple airbrushes, Harbor Freight has a deal where they sell a package of 6 of the very similar airbrushes. They're siphon feed with the little cups, and they come with tops for the cups. I know that Nick Agar travels and demos with that same setup from Harbor Freight. It's like $129 for 6 airbrushes and a little stand and the cups and the caps and stuff. And they're good. They're decent airbrushes. They work pretty good. And Agar travels with them because he can just, when he's done, he just takes them off of the airbrush and caps them off, and they're good till the next time he pulls them out of the little carrying case it comes with. So that's an option if you're interested.
Thanks,
I'm just
Paul.
looking for the link for that website I was on about. I'm not entirely sure where it was, but I'll if I find it, I'll drop it into the chat.
That'd be
That'll
great,
work.
Paul. Thanks.
All right, let's
Hey,
let's
Paul,
swing back to
Paul,
Captain Eddie.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you so much. Thanks.
That's right. You're welcome.